is going to wow us tonight. And after the lecture, he will be autographing his books for you if you'd like to buy one of these new books. So thank you very much, Mr. Neely, for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm about to talk about the Great Okeechobee Hurricane of 1928.
Bring it further to your mouth.
Okay. That should be better. Okay, I'm about to talk about the Great Okeechobee Hurricane of 1928. I call this storm the one that the people in the United States forgot, the one that the Bahamians forgot as well. This is a very unusual storm. When I first found out about this storm in 2005, I was doing research for my second book, The Major Hurricanes to Affect the Bahamas. And I went to the National Hurricane Center to research all of the major storms. And I did them individually, and when it came to the Okeechobee Hurricane of 1928, I kind of ignored it. And I was going to the next storm, and the person, Chris Lansey, who's the person in charge of documenting all the hurricanes of the North Atlantic, told me that that's not one that I should forget. I said, why? It only killed 3 persons in the Bahamas. He said, no. He said, that's the deadliest hurricane that you had in the Bahamas that storm killed about 2,500 persons in the United States. And of that total, 1,400 of them were Bahamian migrant workers. And so I started doing research, and the more I researched, the more I was intrigued by the storm. And I finally got around to publishing a book on it. And if you read the book, you'll understand why they forgot it. Back then, most of those persons who died were black Bahamian migrant workers. They came to the United States, were not counted in the census, so they were not documented. In most cases, were not documented. They came in, worked, got paid, either sent the money back or went back home to the Bahamas. And so there's no documentation of any kind of them. There are a few pictures I got from the Department of Labor, the pictures of Bahamian migrant workers working on the farms in Florida, but in terms of documentation, there's not much there to find about the storm and about those Bahamians. And this is a bit different. This is a different book because the second deadliest hurricane was the Great Bahamas Hurricane of 1866. That storm killed 387 persons in the Bahamas, and this one killed approximately 1,400. And you will understand why I use the term, and the National Hurricane Center used the term approximately for this storm, because no one really knows how many people died, no one knows how many Bahamians died. The person who was responsible for collecting information on the storm was actually the American Red Cross. Back then, the American Red Cross did the counting for the persons who died in the storms in the United States. And they there's a written document about them. They basically said first, prior to 2003, for the 75th anniversary of the storm, the official count was 1,836 persons who died in that storm. And the American Red Cross stated, and the National Hurricane Center stated that 75% of that total were Bahamian, 75% of that total were black migrant workers, and of that total, 75% of that total were Bahamian migrant workers. And that's what they have in the records of the National Hurricane Center and the American Red Cross up to this day. But in 2003, on the 75th anniversary of the storm, after much complaints by many residents in the West Palm Beach area, where the hurricane struck, they basically petitioned the government, petitioned the president, and petitioned the South Florida community to recognize those victims. In 1928, the white victims were given proper funerals. The blacks were dumped in what they call mass graves, and just covered over. There were 3 mass grave sites in Florida. They're still there to this day, and they don't. And one of the things that I wrote to the Prime Minister, requesting that the Bahamas in some way recognize those victims, either by putting a plaque or something on the gravesite of those victims. They were buried, and after they were buried, after about a year or 2, they were neglected. They were forgotten. No one really recalled those storms. And it was only select few dedicated individuals in Florida that brought the storm to the attention of the U.S. government. And so for the 75th anniversary in 2003, they upped the storm total from, instead of 1,836 persons, they upped it to at least 2,500. So you will see, wherever you see the Great Okeechobee hurricane, you will see the word, if the document is before, after 2003, you will see the word approximately or at least 2,500, because no one really knows the exact amount. Many of them were buried without documentation, many were burnt without proper documentation, and so no one really knows the exact amount of persons who died. And I used the word 1,400 approximately, because that's the approximate value of Bahamian migrant workers. And those workers actually, they were responsible for the development of the Bahamas as we know it. We have the area called the Grove. The Grove in the United States was named after the Grove here locally. And money was sent back from those migrant workers to build the Grove, and they also built communities like Engliston. Most of the houses were built from those workers working, getting paid, and sending the money back home to their families.